Hello again, I'm Kenny Fikes, host of your iKnowMedia Roundtable, where we bring you conscientious clarity along with empirical experience, alongside reasoned application and analysis.
Hey guys, I'm Elisa Simmons. I am a Montessori guide in Texas, and I'm hoping our conversation sparks your conversation. And if you enjoy our conversation, make sure you subscribe to our channel.
Hi everyone, I'm Jay Ellis. I'm from Houston. I'm a mom of 3. I'm an AKA. I'm really excited about that all the time, but especially today. And we have a great show for you.
Hi, I'm Michael Malobsky. I am a pediatrician from Denver, Colorado, father of 7, and feeling privileged to be part of the conversation.
Awesome. Good to see you all again. Michael is 6'7", but he feels like standing up today. And Jay Cherie, tell us why you just look like you were standing up. Jay Cherie, tell us why you're excited to be an AKA today. And what does AKA mean? What is that?
Well, for those of you who may not know, AKA is Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. We were the first Black sorority founded in 1908. I pledged at my undergraduate school, the University of Pennsylvania, back in '87. But I'm really excited today because the vice presidential pick for Biden was Kamala Harris, and she happens to be a soror. So the AKAs are thrilled. So I'm just going to say it. And we're going to be giving her our support because we're proud of her and excited about that. And, you know, we're first with a lot of things. I won't brag right now, but we're first with a lot of things.
All right. Hadn't heard that sound in a while.
In a while, but I can still do it.
Got trained to do that, or if you were born with that. So Kamala Harris, Senator Harris, Attorney General Harris, she does represent the American story in many ways. Visually, she is an African-American woman, but we know her heritage is from a East Indian woman and a Black man from, I forgot where, Jamaica, I think?
They're of Jamaican descent. Yeah, I'm not sure if you corrected from there.
But so her story is of the immigrant, but also the African-American woman. And she went through her undergraduate education at a historically Black college, which has some significance and meaning about education and the history of this country as it is. So let's start the show off talking about, I'm going to read a quote from Dan Rather. And Dan says, "Ours is a representative government, but for too long in America, our leadership wasn't representative of the people as a whole, not in gender or race. But here's the thing about representation. Once walls of the status quo are broken, the imagination of the electorate changes." That's a powerful sentence, that last one. The imagination of the electorate changes. So what it looks like to go to a doctor's office in Atlanta and you see 6 brown faces on the wall of all the people who practice there. What does it look like when you go to a Division I Power 5 school conference football game or basketball game and there's a Black coach? What does it look like when there's a Black governor? What does it look like when there is a woman of East Indian descent as the governor in South Carolina? What does it look like? The imagination of people changes. That's a wonderful, wonderful, powerful thing. And so in celebration of an Alpha Kappa Alpha being nominated as the Vice President of the United States, we're going to start this thing off with Jay Cherie and just talk about things like the significance of having a Black woman as a VP candidate, just as a general standard. Go ahead.
I mean, it's excellent. It's excellent. I mean, I think it's probably long overdue for this post, for this opportunity. I think that she has definitely earned her stripes. That's one thing that I definitely want to address, because one of my concerns is that people will assume she was only selected because she's a Black female, not that she's qualified to be there, but she is. She's very well qualified, very well credentialed, very well tenured. So she is a Black woman and we're excited about that, but she also does represent other races, or I should say other ethnicities, right? If she were to become our vice president, she would be representing Indian people, and Asian people. And the other thing that she represents is that she represents an HBCU. And thus far, we have not had anyone at the pinnacle of government who comes from an HBCU. You find that many people, if they are of color, have probably gone to Ivy League schools. I think it's wonderful that this will become a part of Howard's legacy and the legacy of the HBCUs, because I think they often don't get enough credit. So she's amazing as a woman of color, as a woman who represents multiple ethnicities, and as an elected official. I think we're thrilled and lucky to have her.
So speaking of people of color at the pinnacle in politics, I believe that for a variety of reasons, but the show's not about that, but I'll share it with you because as an alumnus of the University of Pennsylvania, like you, our friend Harold Ford Jr., who was behind us at Penn, who became a U.S. representative very early on, finished Penn, went to Michigan law, and then stepped straight into the namesake as following U.S. representative. I thought Harold was going to be the first black president. I thought then, and I think now, he has all the tools. And what I thought was going to happen is that when John Kerry won the nomination, I thought there was a good chance that he was going to pick Harold as the VP. And then if that whole thing played out, Harold could then run for president. I thought it was going to be Harold Ford and not Barack Obama. I actually thought that. Elisa, you want to chime in next?
You know what? I think it's really exciting. And I think that this is something that I've been thinking about because of this show that we're doing. We keep talking about the percentage of the population of America that's black. And every time we say it, it baffles me. And I was trying to figure out why it baffles me. And the ideal that representation matters, that doesn't baffle me, but that number baffles me. And I think it's because in my world, it doesn't seem like the percentage would be that low. I cannot think of a day where I don't speak to someone who's not white. And so when you see the country's numbers and you realize, well, the black population is, what was it, 6%, 16%? Is it 16 or 13%?
It's 13%.
Yeah, it's like, I couldn't imagine that being the true population because that's just not the world I live in. And so, but I can't imagine how scared, I'm trying to grasp how scary it would be for the parts of the country who, there's still towns, Michael's talked about it a few times, there's towns in our country where there's no black kids in the school. And if there is, there's one or two. So think of how shocking this pick would be for them. Barack Obama was a shock to them probably, but think now you have a black woman, and as much as we weren't ready for Hillary Clinton, and so now it's like we weren't ready for a white woman, but we're going to be ready for a black woman. So I'm wondering how the rest of the country is kind of thinking and coming to terms with that. I'm excited for it, but I'm curious to see how other people would be feeling about it.
Yeah. Michael, what do you have to say?
I was struck by that one line, Kenny, that you mentioned, that the imagination of the electorate changes. That, and I'm asking this strictly because I can't answer it for myself because of my own upbringing and my own background. But how much did Barack Obama being a two-term president change how people feel, not just black people but white people, in terms of being able to even imagine or see something like this as being a reality? And how much did that have to do with opening the door to allowing this to happen? Like without a Barack Obama presidency, would this have really been even possible for people to even consider and people to be able to celebrate that something like this has happened?
So
I think it's interesting too, though, that she's like only the second black woman senator. I read that today.
Carl Moseley Brown was first out of Illinois. Yeah.
But that's a problem. I mean, like, how did that happen? That that it's 2020, we've had a black president, and she's only the second black U.S. senator. I think that we got some work to do.
I'm gonna backtrack. Absolutely, I'm gonna backtrack a little bit and say, in response to Michael, I believe that just as a forest sometimes has to be burned, things get burned down. You do these intentional burnings to create new growth. I think Donald Trump has done a lot of that for our country. There's some things that he's done, rolling back EPA standards, et cetera. I don't want to go all into the politics of it left or right. But I believe that because we had Barack Obama as an African-American president, he shook up so much the imagination and people didn't take it seriously, right? I think if people had taken it more seriously, they'd have been out to get him and ruined him even earlier. And then followed by Donald Trump, who became the antithesis of this. I won't go into my background as a person, but you guys know some of it and people watching may know some of it. But I said as recently as 2 years before Donald Trump won, that based on my experience as a black man in the United States of America, not with a chip on my shoulder, but not blinded, that if someone ran for the presidency, or even more so the governorship in a place like Alabama, and just said the N-word, I don't care about them, I don't like them, the hell with them, that person could win because there was enough of that under the underbelly. And essentially, that's what Donald Trump did. He just didn't say the words. So I was right about that. So what does that mean? It means that the American electorate was shaken up twice. It was shaken up by this black man, and then it was shaken up by Donald Trump. And people have to come to grips with what's real. And so you're going to have that old guard that hangs on, like the George Wallace is standing in the doorway of the University of Alabama. But as we talk about moving forward as a nation, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's medicine, whether it's education, whatever it is, we cannot afford to hang on to those ideals. Even if you are a racist, you would almost have to say, we've got to move past this because we're getting left behind in the industrialized world, and move beyond that. I think we're just shaking up a little bit. So, Alicia, you want to add something?
You know what? I think I agree. I think it's the reason why she gets to be our VP right now. I think it does. I think it's inspired by, okay, we can do this. We've done it before and survived. But I think so many people were just I think so many people are just sick of having a male-on-male ticket. It's just like, I can't do it anymore. We saw that we could be more creative. Let's get more creative. But I also think, and that was going back to my point, is I think Barack Obama, I witnessed personally Barack Obama's presidency inspired or put fear in a lot of the white men that I know. And I think the reason why is because they feel like they're losing their placehold. And I've talked to many of them, the group that I know that felt that way. I speak to them regularly about it, and they will deny it. And it's because he didn't have experience and he wasn't qualified and all this stuff. And I'm just sitting here going, but then you voted for Trump, who had less experience and had all these things going against him. But what made you comfortable about that? And I think it's the shakeup of the picture changing. And I think they need a way to feel that it's okay to say that, and to say that they're scared of this change.
Well, that qualification thing is old hat. Again, as a person who looks like myself, there's almost a progression, right? There are stages of development. So those of us who took psychology in college, and whether you talked about Erickson's stages of development and how they go, and they're just natural. There are these stages of development that I've experienced with white males over the years. I haven't experienced it in a number of years, but it happens more, I think, with guys in their 20s or early 30s, maybe in teens, but it goes something like this. At first, the black person looks like they're just different. Like, wow, you're different. You don't fit the stereotype. And then it becomes, wow, you're kind of smart. Like, really? And then it becomes this, well, how did you learn that? How do you know that? How did you get there? How did you get in that school, right? Like, because it makes them look at themselves like they couldn't do that. And then the next stage is you're kind of arrogant, right? And you're just being yourself. And then the stage after that is, who do you think you are? And the stage after that is sabotage. It's a natural progression, but it kind of, that qualification thing goes in line with that. Jay, you got anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that with like racists who don't believe that we're qualified, part of why they don't believe that we're qualified or should be where we are is because of the constant narrative and the subliminal messages about Blacks not being competent, but also when you don't tell a history that shows that we contributed to anything, right? Why should they think that we're capable? The stereotypes that they've learned about and that they constantly hear are that we are incapable. And the only reason we get into certain schools was because of affirmative action. And the only reason we get certain jobs is because of affirmative action, but not because of our own ability or hard work. As long as that is in the back of their minds, they're never going to anticipate that we could just be successful because maybe we worked hard or we were capable. And it's always going to be a shock, right? Those are going to be the people, like every now and again, somebody will say to me, wow, your son, Bobby, he's so well-spoken. And I'm like, thank you, but like, why are you surprised about this, right?
Yeah,
why does that
is that the
surprise you?
compliment?
Right, exactly. And they think it is, you know, I know they're not trying to be offensive, but the thinking behind that is you see this Black teenager and you don't expect him to be articulate, and you don't expect him to be a deep thinker, and you don't expect him to be well-read or well-informed, and you're surprised. So I often want to ask them, if he were a 15-year-old Caucasian male, would you be surprised that he was well-spoken? Like, probably not. And I think it's that underlying subconscious thinking that keeps people believing that we really aren't capable. And we haven't earned anything that we've gotten. It's just been given to us because of the miracle of affirmative action.
Quite the opposite. So Michael, here's a question I have for you. Because I always thought of Detroit, Michigan, Oakland, California, and in my adult life, starting in maybe my mid to late 20s, Atlanta was becoming one. And Baltimore and Washington, D.C. as kind of chocolate cities, right? Like, I've had a conversation with Black people who even said, you know, if I get sick of just being in this country and around racism, I can live in D.C. and I can go to a Black grocery store, a Black restaurant, a Black dentist, a Black doctor, a Black Episcopal church with a bishop, or Black Catholic church, or Black supermarket, whatever it is. And I can just divorce myself from this racism. And when I have to go back out there into the world, I will. So you grew up in the DC area, but I forgot at exactly which town, but I know whether it's Oxon Hill, Maryland, or Prince George's County, wherever it is around DC, there's a bunch of Black folks. So did you kind of miss that interaction somehow, some way growing up or in high school?
You know, no, I mean, I didn't. You know, I had, in fact, you know, the individual that I called you about, my friend who was a judge in Louisville, Kentucky, has I have long-term relationships going back to middle school with at least 4 to 5, you know, Black guys who shared my basketball trajectory, and when they're now all lawyers and judges and businessmen. I grew up in a fairly affluent suburb of DC called Potomac. My high school was a lot of Jewish guys like me, but the largest historically Black neighborhood that went back to actually just, you know, slavery era and has been a Black neighborhood since slavery. All of their kids go to my high school. And so every major sports team in my high school is well represented. So if you played sports in my high school, even if you are, even though it's an affluent suburb, you had relationships with Black people. You had to, if you wanted to be on a team, because it was pretty mixed, even though it was a wealthy suburb that you would not expect it to be as mixed as it was. But, you know, I was listening to Jay's description of that interaction that people comment on your son all the time. And as a pediatrician, as someone who talks to teenagers all the time, you know, nowadays, actually, I'm surprised at any 15-year-olds who can express themselves at all, because regardless of race, we're losing that capability in our 15-year-olds faster than anything. But, you know, a couple of my friends from high school who grew up with me in Maryland and who are successful Black professionals as adults, several of them moved to Atlanta for that very reason, Kenny. They wanted to raise their kids in a neighborhood where it wasn't unusual to live in a neighborhood where your neighbors are predominantly Black, and, oh, by the way, they're also doctors and business owners, and they really wanted to raise their kids in a situation where that was normal. And that's why they moved specifically to Atlanta, actually, because, they didn't want to be in a situation where it was such an unusual thing to have that. They wanted it to feel normal for their
Right.
kids.
Right. Good. Okay. Well, I wanted to ask you that question because, I figured there's no way you could grow up in the DC area and not have exposure.
You have to try. Like you have to send your kid to like Barron Trump's kids' school in Silver Spring, St. Andrews or something like that in order to avoid it. If you go to any situation in the DC area, you are interacting and engaging with the wider.
Okay. So, post-racial society, who wants to tackle that bear? We certainly don't live in a post-racial society, but someone was talking about it earlier, and I can tell you guys, I was doing business with a few companies down in Chattanooga when Barack Obama became the president, and there were literally Black entrepreneurs who were doing, between 2 million to 5 million a year in their businesses, and they all dropped to a couple of 100,000 because people were so angry and upset that they took it out on these entrepreneurs, basically saying, we're in a post-racial society. You don't need us, whatever, these contracts can go somewhere else. And these guys' businesses failed as a backlash. You want to tackle that one, Jay?
I mean, I think that the concept of a post-racial society is a little absurd, right? Because racism, the history of it exists along a continuum. So it's never really gone away. I mean, to me, the term suggests that it's no longer here. And that's not true. I think it's just that we have some laws that protect us from open discrimination. But what we end up doing is engaging in or finding ourselves in the midst of kind of more subtle and insidious racism. So you can't just deny someone something based upon race. However, you can find ways to deny them things based upon race that are very subtle, and that hasn't gone away. That's worse in some ways, because at least if you call me a certain name, I know that you are my adversary. I'm not even going to come to you for help. I expect you to try to get in my way. But it's the people who don't do that and may not even be aware that they're racist and may not even be aware that their actions and their philosophies oppress others. So I feel like the idea of a post-racial society, we certainly are not in that at all. It's got a lot of racism going on. It's just that it looks different than it did years ago.
Yeah, here's an interesting one that I'm dealing with in Knoxville, Tennessee. So if we had tons of viewership, it would be public, but maybe it's semi-public saying it now. And then at least I want to read a Dan Rather quote for you. But I'm dealing personally with a scenario where the tiers are 1, 2, 3, and there were 4. And coincidentally, they're all white women. The mayor of Knoxville is a white woman. The cabinet member over community development is a white woman. The community development boss is a white woman. And then the person who handled sort of approving people for certain projects is a white woman. I think the 4 of them combined have less experience than I do in that area, but they're all in line to approve me. And I don't think that anybody thinks that's weird. No one thinks that's weird. I believe that alone, I have more experience than the 4 of them combined in finance, construction, development, pro formas, interest rates, all those kinds of things, looking at projects. But they are the people down to the last one that look at me to tell me if I'm qualified. Amazing. Elisa, let me read this quote from Dan Rather. Any scientist will tell you, human beings are by our basic nature biased creatures. Biases, especially when they're subconscious, help us make sense of a complicated world. What do we fear? What do we understand? What challenges our sense of comfort? What bias leads us astray? Biases close us to new opportunities, but often, if we let ourselves, we can break down these biases as it related to a lot of the people that maybe you say you deal with on a daily basis or regularly.
Yeah. I think we see it in the cafeterias in high school still. When you talk about post-racial societies, when you walk into a cafeteria in most high schools, they are still extremely segregated. And it's because when you walk in, most of the time, most people really naturally, exactly how he quoted it, tend to go towards people they have something in common with. The easiest thing to see that you have in common is your skin color or your gender. It's the easiest thing too. And so I think that that's why so many people tend to cluster together, and they don't realize that their biases are starting to form or were preformed for them based on their education, how they're taught. Jay made a great point about, if you don't exist in history, why is this your country? Why do you keep claiming that this is your country? I was taught in history we did everything. And so you create these little subconscious biases that nobody realizes they have. And when you don't realize that you are feeling a way towards a different demographic than yourself, be it female or male, be it racial, be it religious, then you're going to project things that may not be true, but also could be hurtful or detrimental to the other person's success. And it closes you off from all kinds of opportunities.
Well, and here's another thing, and then we're going to roll into Michael, because I see steam coming from his ears on that last thing I said about biases. So, and I'm doing this on purpose. I hope that someone will say, hey guys, he talked about this. In that same scenario I'm talking about in the city of Knoxville, this idea where pioneers are judged and judged harshly. They're judged on scales weighted against people who look like them. For example, if a contractor screwed up on your house, Michael, and he were white, you would say that contractor was bad and you just go to the next guy. But a lot of times if it's a black contractor or a female contractor and they do a bad job, you wouldn't say, well, the rest of the black contractors are no good. See, I told you so. Or the rest of the females are no good. See, I told you so. So even parroted from the highest of levels in the city, there was a black contractor involved with a project here, and I forgot what it was called, something like 5 points. And from the top down in this row of people I'm talking about, they parrot this thing and say, we don't want another 5 points. Well, what does that have to do with me? Mm. And this is 2020, right? Michael, what do you got on the bias stuff or anything else?
Oh, because of what I do for a living, which is I spend all day talking to parents about their children, I can't help but think about this in terms of the things that we've discussed before a little bit about what do we do about this? You know, I'm still blown away by that kid's video that a random town in the middle of Arkansas, he stands outside of a Walmart for 2 hours, and the level of hate by white people that gets thrown at him for a sign that just says Black Lives Matter. I mean, I'm still blown away by it. So there is so much under the surface that, and then what you guys were saying about this assumed incompetence or people, it all comes down to me. One thing is lack of exposure. That if people earlier on in their lives had meaningful, long-term relationships with people, all of those with people who are different from them, all those assumptions and all those things that tend to come out, like you were saying, Kenny, you know, it starts out in their 20s, then it evolves in their 30s, and it looks like something else in their 40s. But that only has to do with the fact that they have no meaningful long-term relationship with somebody from that group that goes back to childhood or young adulthood that can dispel or can contradict any of those assumptions or biases that are held because they just don't have any exposure. If we could find a way to do that for children in some structured way, I feel like that would be the most constructive thing to have any movement on this, because people are always going to, like you said, Elisa, they're always going to gravitate towards the like. They're always going to be, young people especially are threatened by, you know, stepping outside their comfort zone socially. And it's always going to be that way unless we can create situations or do something to push it in the other direction. I think it all comes back to, you have to have a relationship with somebody from that group that's going to be the only way to fight the constant sort of tendency that we have to think of the other in terms of these very general, mostly ignorant terms.
So yes, you can't like people you don't know. So going back to my own life, today, this very day, I had a conversation with a gentleman who has power to make some things happen with some large agencies. And I proposed a mentor protege program with him for smaller companies and larger companies. And I kept it at smaller, socioeconomics, because they like to use the law against you. You can't have race-based things. So I said, just make it based on socioeconomics or zip code. And the reason is, people do business with people they like. Is it racism sometimes? Yes. but people do business with people they like. And if I don't know you, how can I like you? And so a lot of times the smaller companies don't go to these functions and meet these larger companies because of apathy. I disagree with one thing you said, and I'm sorry, you're the doc, but you said people have a hard time getting out of their comfort zones, especially younger people. I think it's especially older people.
Well, I'm going to say teenagers. I think that like 8-year-olds have it's way less established. I mean, my daughters who are my kids when they were 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 they had way less concerns about interacting with people that were different from them. But when you hit 14, 15, 16, 17, I think the walls go up, the insecurities kick in, and it becomes a lot harder. You're right. But I think if we're talking about, I was just mentioning because Jay mentioned her 15-year-old. I think that's the group really struggle with stepping out of their comfort zone sometimes.
Gotcha. Well, Jay, I heard the governor of Oklahoma call a U.S. representative from Oklahoma articulate at one point. The governor was Frank Keating at the time, and I'm not saying anything bad about him. I'm just saying he was a white male governor in Oklahoma in roughly 1996-ish. And J.C. Watts was an African-American U.S. Republican representative. And he said, JC is awfully articulate, and I just laughed. So Jay or Lisa, want to chime in?
You know what? I think though that one is the articulate. My husband's very best friend in the world, other than my brother, is a man named Brandon, and he's a nurse practitioner. He's about 35 years old, young Black guy. And when they go out, they play basketball together. And when they go places, the very first, they play basketball here in Tyler at a church. And the church league is supposed to be for professionals. And when they go there, though, the first thing someone new asked them immediately is, what do y'all do for a living? And I think that we need to create some sort of social contract, because it triggers my husband because he observes them not asking. Like, it's a new guy to the court, they don't go through and ask everybody else. And so I jokingly say, you should just say you're street pharmaceutical and just see what they say. And, play into their desired stereotype if that's what you want to do. But I think we need to construct a social contract, because a lot of people don't understand the triggers. They don't understand telling a woman to calm down. Hey, just calm down is a trigger for a huge amount of women and can get you cussed out. They don't understand.
What if it's ended with honey?
Toots. How about toots?
My friend Eleanor, I have a really good friend, Eleanor, and she knows that I will cuss you out if you refer to me as honey, or sweetheart. Call me sweetheart. But we don't. Yeah, we don't understand. And my grandfather, he's dead now, grew up in Arkansas. My husband was not allowed into my grandparents' house for years. But now he died loving Thomas to death. But I knew he had some racial tendencies. He just never said them to me. But because of his lack of exposure and then getting the exposure, he was able to grow a whole lot. And his eyes opened completely. He voted for Barack Obama, like baffled everybody. But he did not understand, because he's an old Southern white guy, that if he called my husband boy one more time, we were going to jump him. And so there's a lot of these triggers that other groups don't realize other groups have. And being called eloquent or not eloquent, articulate is a trigger. Being called stout, I get called stout when I'm at Lowe's because I can pick up the wood, and I'm like, really? Like, don't call me stout. That's a cow. So I think that we need to be more gracious on some levels, but then I think we need to allow everybody to realize what are the triggers. Call me.
I didn't know that. I thought heifer was a cow. Stout means a cow.
Stout is like a heavy animal. I didn't know that it was bad. I thought stout meant strong. But supposedly it's a big boned animal.
Gotcha. I have a story about being called my man. It's like honey or toots, but I want to let Jay have some time here first. So I'll tell that story first. I'm in Oklahoma City, coming back to you know, I live here in Knoxville, but I keep an apartment there and it's above a cigar bar. Yay, like, makes sense. And so there's a young white male, probably if I had to guess, 27, female with him, seemed like they were together in a romantic way, about the same age. And I have a bag of food from someplace like, I don't know, some Mexican grill. And he says, hey, my man, looks like you got food for all of us. And he's just trying to be nice. And I just stopped and went, don't say that. And he was like, what do you mean? I said, my man, I'm like 50 something years old and you're like half my age. This whole my man thing, I didn't use the words, if I were a white guy, would you say my man? He understood it. I said, I don't speak like that myself. So just say hello or something. Don't do the my man thing. Mm-hmm. Just a teaching moment, okay? But we're good. I can see you're a nice guy. And the young lady looked at me and she looked at him and she did something like this. Teaching moment. and I just went upstairs. But people don't understand that whole honey, toots, my man, hey, brother. But yeah, and there are exceptions. And I can talk about the exceptions later. Jay, what do you got?
I mean, you know, I think when those things happen, people actually, they mean well. That's the saddest part about it, is that they mean well. And it never occurs to them that it's somehow demeaning, that implicit to the comment is something condescending or something that suggests that they think less of you. For, you know, obviously he thought that he couldn't talk to you except to use colloquialisms, right? And so that probably is based on some subconscious thinking that Black people aren't very articulate, and you wouldn't connect with him unless he was like, oh, my man, you know? And, but I think people are trying, and at least maybe because they really want to make a connection, they would be open to being corrected. But I think at the same time, there are people who get offended that they're corrected. They're like, well, what's wrong with you? Like, why are you so sensitive? Like, women get that all the time, right? If someone here calls me darling and I'm like, I'm not your darling, then they're, well, what's wrong with her? You know what I mean? And they don't understand that that's kind of, is disrespectful, but it's not meant to be. And so I think, you know, it's one of the things that just requires a lot of teaching and open-mindedness and humility and patience, because we're asking to change an entire culture that is behaving in a way that they think is good. Like, they don't feel like they're antagonistic. So it's difficult, but we just have to, I think, be patient and be kind in how we deliver the lesson. Try to explain why it is disrespectful.
What do you got, Michael? Talk about sports. Tell me about some exceptions in sports, right? Membership has its privileges.
Yes, it does.
As teammates, couldn't we say something different to each other than a white guy and a Black guy just on campus?
So listen, Kenny and I both were on the varsity teams at Penn. Kenny was on the football team, and I was on the basketball team. And Penn is, I feel the further away I get from my Penn experience, the more grateful I am for the kind of place that it was, because it really is a pretty diverse place. Like, Kenny, your teammates were kind of from all over. I mean, you had, right? I'm sure you had guys from white prep schools in the Northeast. Yeah. And you had guys from much poorer backgrounds and African Americans, and I did too. But and when you're together, and you're together for a long time, and you spend a lot of time together, and just like in the military, you share intense. I'm not comparing being on the basketball team to being in war. What I'm saying is that there becomes kind of a survivalist sort of experience, because you're all going through very difficult things together, at least what you perceive as difficult. And so people take license with one another, and you can, in a way that you can't from the guy just saying, my man, at the restaurant. Because if your teammate did that, you would know where that's coming from. But because you have a history and a bond that goes a long time. And that, to me, falls under the rubric of emotional intelligence. And I think that so much of our society lacks basic emotional intelligence. And for that guy to recognize that this person he doesn't know, and he's going to hit you with a "my man," is just, to me, so buffoonish and stupid.
It is stupid.
And I'm not putting myself on some pedestal, but I deal with people all day, as do you, as do all of us. And when you deal with people all day, you kind of know not to do shit like that. That's just dumb. And so, and that to me is what is so frustrating, is that there's so many parts of this country where people go to school, live and work, and they never leave their 8-mile radius, and they never get to learn this. And so I'm grateful to my parents every day who got me to a place where I could learn something like that, regardless of the other stuff, that I learned. But I got to learn that. And
so here's the thing about exceptions. You mentioned emotional intelligence. And guys, we for the most part, unless we're dealing with a person who's so sly that they're like a sociopath manipulator, we know how people mean things. But here's the other exception. Like regionally, I grew up in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. So I don't even have to say Chapel Hill. I can just say North Carolina. I can say somewhere Virginia and South. Son, let me tell you something. We say son all the time. And that's not black or white. It's just son, boy, I tell you what. And so you have to know the difference. And if it's a white guy that's saying son to me because he says son to everybody that's younger than him, or a white guy that's calling me son because he thinks it's antebellum Mississippi, there's a difference. There's a lot of those. Elisa or Jay?
You know what? There are a lot of those, but I think you get to the point where you just get tired. I play tennis, and most of the people I play tennis with are professional. Most of them are white. And at the end of the day, and the men specifically, I love playing mixed doubles. And the men specifically, when I'm playing, will call me sweetheart or darling. My husband and my mixed partner is my mixed partner, and he will tell me, he'll say, calm down. But at what point, I think as much as you need to be gracious, as much as you need to pay attention to their intention, what's sad is when it's the fourth person who you've been gracious to their intention. That fourth person, you're nice. That fifth person, you might cuss out. And then that fifth person doesn't get the opportunity to realize that they were wrong. You just become the stereotype then. Like you become.
So I'm going to let you finish, but to chime in right there, it's important. I'm not talking about being gracious because they mean well and they're ignorant. I'm talking about it's just standard language. Like it can be a black man or a white man, but if he's talking about someone of the male species who's 10 years or 20 years younger than himself, he's going to say that boy. It doesn't have to do with race.
Right. Well, no, and
or a white man, and he's talking to a male species that's 10 years younger than himself, he's likely to say, son, let me tell you what. And it doesn't black or white.
But I completely get that, because I know, like, the guys I'm playing tennis with, they're not calling me sweetheart or darling. I'm younger than most of them. I finally got to be on the 40s team. I was really excited because now I'm the baby on the team again. But they're saying it because they're from Texas, and that's a regular way for a man to refer to a woman they don't know regularly or they don't know their name is sweetheart or darling. I did not grow up in Texas.
Even the same age, though. Even the same age, though. That's a different thing.
Go ahead, Michael.
I'm sorry. I mean, I know that I grew up in maybe a sheltered environment, but in my world, and so let's just call my world mostly Jewish people, if you have a Jewish mother, there is no way on God's green earth you would ever, 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 ever refer to a woman you don't know as sweetheart or darling. It would never. So
and that's the thing. They're not saying it to me to be disrespectful. It's because we're in a match together and they don't know my name. They can't remember it. I've walked on the court with their nightmare. My husband looks super athletic, so they've decided they're going to lose, and they call me sweetheart or honey. And at the end of the day, that's what the point is. I know that the fifth guy's intention is not disrespectful. I know it's just area that he lives in, but at the end of at a certain point, I'm going to serve so hard the ball hits you in your ball. Like, it's going to be bad. And
I respect that, but I still think we're talking about different things. You're talking about misogyny. Like, it's
But their intentions are not that. Their intentions are not to be that. Oh, okay.
No, I know their intentions are not bad, but that's still misogynistic.
Yeah.
I'm talking about a culture that's not racist. It's about
Mhm.
age with some people, not all of them, but different thing.
So
Jay,
age
it's
is
been a while. What do you got?
I mean, I think it's hard to compare these two examples though, because like a man, if you're talking about whether or not a comment is racist or not, someone can apply that comment to anyone, right? So maybe in North Carolina, they call everyone son, whether you're black, whether you're white, so it's not really a racial thing. But when it comes to the example of calling a woman darling, well, a guy is not likely to call another guy darling, right? So it's always based on gender, typically, that it's going to be said. And it's not meant to be disrespectful. It really isn't. It's considered a part of, like, you know, the Southern charm and hospitality. And like, and what's your problem? I was being nice to you. I called you darling. You want to be called darling? Everybody wants to be a darling, right? But you can't say that it is sexist, because you're not calling a dude darling. You're calling a dude by his name, right? And so, and you know, and it has to do with some of that too. I think that we all kind of want to be respected in that way. Like, learn my name. You know, in the case of my name, try to say it right, but I'm going to make it easy for you until you call me Jay, because it's just disrespectful if you decide to call me what you want to call me.
Mhm.
And especially when you're not calling the guy next to you a name other than his own. So I think it's hard to compare those two examples. But I do think that most times people don't mean harm in those situations. And I think that those are good teaching moments, but they do get tiresome. Sometimes you're just not in the mood for a microaggression, even though that person doesn't understand what they just did.
What do you say to the guy who says something like, I'm almost laughing at myself for asking the question, but I've heard it asked. I heard it asked when Hillary Clinton was running. I didn't hear it asked this time. I'm sorry. I just want to get your reaction. I'm going to pretend that I'm a Neanderthal for a moment, okay? What do you say to the guy who says, I don't know about a woman president because she might be too emotional in time of war or things of that nature? What I snorted on TV. Like, what do you think?
With that. You know what? I think we're going to get that with Kamala Harris. I think she's going to, I don't know if the country's ready for that. And the sad thing is that women will say it. I know what it's like to PMS once a month, that she's going to go, listen, these are the same chicks that push children out of their vaginas. You think they can't handle sitting down at a war table? Like, y'all need to shut up. We've been raising the entire country. Everybody has a mother. We've been raising the entire country. So you cannot say that because she's a woman, she's too emotional, as I get emotional.
Mm.
Listen, I don't think you could say anything like that anymore. I think none of that holds water, because look who's in the White House. Look who's elected. I mean, there could be no person who is more emotionally infantile, narcissistic, and weird than that guy.
This is true, but he's a white male. He gets to be.
Yeah.
You see, the rest of white males aren't going to be judged based on Donald Trump.
True. That's true.
Yes.
So, you know, when I listen to you guys talk, listen, the truth be told is that I don't get to talk to people from other parts of the country in an in-depth way, like when I talk to you guys. Mm-hmm. And the more that we exchange these ideas and these experiences, the more I'm sort of, someone else mentioned this to me, so it's not my idea, but we really are not one country. We're like 5 countries, meaning Texas. And that part, there's a whole world of stuff that is just normal there that we can't even imagine being normal anywhere else. The Mid-Atlantic, the Northeast, the Mountain West, I've been out here 20 years. I feel like I'm living on another planet to where I grew up for most of my entire childhood and adult life up to age 30 was in the Mid-Atlantic. And so I'm still not used to how you think different, you talk different, you have different priorities. Like out here, yeah. I mean, if you come out here and you think like getting at least 30 ski days a year is a professional priority, and people run their lives around that. Like that is
So, do you know what go-go music is, Michael?
Of course, yeah. I
love name one go-go artist.
I love it. Yeah.
Name one go-go artist.
Experience Unlimited.
Okay, and Rare Essence, Doing the Butt.
Right.
So why do I ask him that? A different world. man, if you ran, Michael is Jewish. Okay, I don't want to confuse you with a white guy. But in Colorado,
Thank you.
ask anyone else white and mostly black what go-go music is, and the numbers are going to be, they're not going to know.
They're going
I just want to point out the difference in the worlds.
Right. Well, they think of girls with thigh-high boots and poles. That's what they think of.
Right.
Nothing to do with an actual musical genre that is restricted to one state, basically.
Chuck Brown. Yes. What do you got, Jay?
You know, it's interesting that you say 5 different countries. I mean, Texas is very special. Texas, as you know, wanted to be its own country. I think it still wants to do that.
Still does.
And you know, in our state, I mean, and then maybe this goes on in other states. I'm not accustomed to it, right? Because prior to this, I've lived in big cities, but there's so many communities here in Texas where people have just never left them. I mean, we're talking about communities that still don't have Wi-Fi or enough cell service, right? And they are very contained in their little communities. They rarely ever leave it. They kind of look at the outside world as, you know, something almost to be feared. And so those people, it's very difficult for them to imagine that there are people who look different than them, who are productive citizens, who are not there to harm them, or not there to take anything away from them. And, you know, the ones that I've interacted with, you know, it's interesting because I would have thought, well, they'll be naturally antagonistic, but many of them are just very nice people, but just no exposure. And I think that brings us back to kind of what Elisa was describing. When we see teenagers in a cafeteria, and I mean, I was like this. When I got to Penn, I mean, I had gone to a high school that was predominantly white, but I was comfortable with Black people. So I congregated where they were congregating. It was my preference socially. I was comfortable there. My mother had exposed me in as much as I went to a couple of schools that had white kids, but I had not been exposed to children in other neighborhoods to play with. So that wasn't a comfort zone for me. And I think that you see that on that same level. If we're not exposing our kids when they're very young to other cultures, and I mean, not just a culture that's necessarily white, but even other cultures, to appreciate them, right? Beyond, you know, here in Texas, like Tex-Mex is a big thing, and they celebrate Cinco de Mayo like it was their own holiday. So this is what people understand of Mexicans, as opposed to let's really teach our kids about some Mexican culture. We tend not to do a lot of that. As Americans, we often don't do that. We're very self-centered. And so it makes it very difficult as kids grow up, because we've already taught them all of these subconscious messages about staying with your own. Even if I don't say, stay with your own type, when I don't take you out to mingle and socialize with others, I'm telling you, stay with your own type. If you only see that I only have friends who look like me, then you're not getting the message that it is okay and it's a good thing to get to know people of other cultures and ethnicities. And I think we probably have to all work on that more. I think as Black people, if we want to be successful professionally, we're going to have to insert ourselves places where there are mostly white people. We don't have a choice. But we
Unless
still,
you move to DC or Detroit.
Orlando.
right, chocolate. There you go. You know, but I mean, I think we all end up doing that on some level. I think it takes a very conscious effort to indoctrinate your child to appreciate and be open to other cultures, so that by the time they're teenagers, they don't mind sitting at the table that's got 5 Asian kids and 1 Mexican kid. And I mean, you know, they're okay with that. But it's a tall order sometimes. And it really depends on what your personal world looks like.
Well, we'll do another show at another point on this, but unfortunately, a lot of Black folks are indoctrinated like that, and don't think very much of each other and believe that they're the exceptions. One of the other things I think, and we still have to talk about this unity thing with socioeconomics, people at the bottom of the ladder coming together and not being pitted against each other based on silly things like race. But if you really look at the facts, they don't even match up. If you take a lot of the people who support Trump and his idea of deportation and rounding up immigrants, whether they're legal or illegal, but whatever, but you take these same group of 1%ers who are operating by investing capital gains in opportunity zones around the country. So they're building using capital gains, and I could talk a whole show about that. In fact, I was on a panel about that recently. But if you deported all the people that they make the voters, their electorate think, like Trump's base, that they make that base believe they want to deport, all those jobs would shut down.
Mm-hmm.
That's filling their coffers. So it doesn't even make sense on its face, right? They want their base to believe that they want to deport these people, but they also pass tax laws for these opportunity zones for themselves and their capital gains. You can't do one and do the other. Because I know from the construction world that it is highly, highly, highly made up of Mexican people, whether they're Mexican Americans or whether they're immigrants. Can't have both ways. So just threw that in there as a empirical, practical thing. What you got, Elisa? It's been a while. We miss you.
She's frozen.
Okay. There she is.
There she is.
Did you throw something to me? Because I didn't hear it.
I did. I just said, what do you got? We miss you.
Oh, well, you know what? I think Jay, if we go back to what Jay was talking about with the not going outside of your comfort zone and all that stuff, it's true. Even not going to playgrounds. If your playground, if your playground isn't diverse, you're exactly what Jay said is going to happen. And I think that's where Michael and I have kind of had this discussion a few times or mentioned it. Parenting is the most important job that you could choose to do. And so many of us as parents don't pay attention to and have purpose when we're doing things. It's like, I'm going to teach you how to walk because you're going this way. Like, I'm not going to teach you how to pay attention. You're going to fall a bunch. If you fall a bunch, you'll start watching out for things. You should parent with purpose and on purpose. And so I think that when you make that a priority, then your children's exposure gets so much greater. But there's so many people that don't think that's a priority.
That's right. I've often
And some
said, if
people
you
are
have,
afraid. Some people are scared. You know what I mean? I think for people of color, it's sometimes scary to kind of push your child out there. I think that was one thing that I saw living in Tyler was, Tyler's really segregated. So you've got the south part of Texas, Tyler, where you have more affluent people, a lot of white people, and then you have the north part where you have black people. And the black people really don't venture much into South Tyler unless they have to.
Yeah.
And I think that they are concerned when it comes to their kids. I think they're like, hey, you don't go over there. There's nothing there for you except trouble, right?
The proverbial size of the tracks.
Fear.
Yes.
Proverbial size of the tracks. So here's something I've done purposefully. First of all, I've often said to people, if you have children, one of the most important things, if not the most important thing you can do, is push a good human being out into the world. With that said, in terms of preparing someone, I think I shared with you guys recently that we're closing on my daughter Sydney's house next week. She's 20 years old. She's not even going to be 21 until March. But if you look at a study that was done about 2 years ago in Boston on disparities of wealth, the average black family in the city limits of Boston, Massachusetts, United States of America, was about negative $29,000. The average amount of, for the average net wealth for the white family in the inner city of Boston was a little over $400,000. And the study showed that the primary factor was home ownership. So intentionally, that's why I'm buying my 20-year-old house next week, because she gets to start off that way with home ownership, even before she gets pushed into the world. And whether she stays in Knoxville or not, she's got this property that starts, and maybe we'll do more. But anyway, that's intentional. To Kamala Harris, Senator Harris, this has been a good conversation, y'all, but let's remember that this was not ever about a lack of participation because we didn't want to, and it was never about a lack of competence or qualifications. But there are plenty of African-American candidates and otherwise now. And just for the record, if you do the history and you go back on posts or Facebook or whatever, she was my pick before she dropped out. Some of it's politics and some of it's I just like her. Have you guys ever heard her laugh?
Yes.
She is just so engaging, like a baby's laugh that's contagious. I just like her, right? Like, I think that matters sometimes when people are smart. Barack Obama is a little left-leaning to me, if we want to talk politics, which we won't go, but I'm just saying he's a little left for me personally. But some of my friends who know some of my political stances said, Kenny, well, the white friends, Kenny, you can't vote for him just because he's black. And I was like, watch me. Because sometimes it's just how it is, right? So anyway, anybody got anything to take us out other than that?
I think that was a good wrap up for us.
All
You know
right.
what I would like to say and send the message out there, like vote. You know, one of the things that I'm afraid of, two things with the Biden-Harris ticket. I'm afraid that women will not support her because so many women did not support Hillary Clinton. A lot of white women did not support Hillary Clinton when she very much represented them. She was very qualified. She was very credentialed. And not only did they not support her, but they supported someone who was the antithesis of her. And they supported someone whose ethics were in question and someone who told them that he would grab their vaginas. So I'm worried about those ladies. And I'm also worried that Black people won't come out to vote like they need to. And so my message is get there, vote, because not voting is a powerful thing. And you need to understand the power when you choose not to vote, what happens. So I think she's amazing, but show up and support somebody. Don't just stay home.
So I'm gonna admit something, that I did not vote in the 2016 election because it was, to me, I couldn't bring myself to physically support either person for individual reasons, and I had no idea. I didn't have an understanding of what Jay was talking about at the time, about how, well, what does it matter, like, when you don't vote? And I've learned a lot more in the last 4 years of the consequences of that. You amplify the power sometimes of the groups that shouldn't be amplified by being silent. Yeah, absolutely.
And think of the 1960s and 50s when Jewish Americans and Black Americans marched and died together for the right to vote. People died so that we can vote. Jay, you want to take us out with a what's that thing you do, that noise? And
a skiwi? I get the skiwi again? I
You
get
get
to
to do it. Kamala Harris is.
There you go. I didn't make it long. It was short and sweet. Shout out to Senator Kamala Harris, my soror. You go, girl.
All right. Bye-bye. Until next time.
Bye-bye.